Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world. Welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report, your one-stop source for all the latest news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program. Now, here's your host, Michael Butler.
Hello, and welcome to the Gone Fission Nuclear Report. Today is Monday, July 10th, 2023. We're covering all the news from the Department of Energy's Environmental Management Program across the country. We thank our friends at Fluor for being presenting sponsor for today's episode. DOE's EM cleanup program is complex, expensive, and long-term. It requires experienced management, a skilled workforce, continual funding from Congress, consultation with regulators, buy-in and support from communities and other stakeholders, setting priorities, measuring milestones, and lots of careful planning. For the layman who follows the program, that planning is best conveyed in EM Strategic Vision. The vision covers a 10-year period and is updated annually. In today's episode, we'll take a look at the latest EM Strategic Vision covering the coming decade from 2023 to 2033. I think you'll learn a lot from today's discussion, which will include a lot of facts and figures and an interview with two officials from DOE headquarters. Here's Erik Olds, EM's Director of Communications.
If you look at it holistically, for about 3 decades, really more than 30 years now, the EM program has really tackled one of the largest cleanup efforts in the world. In fact, it likely is the largest cleanup project in the world. And that project has really been to address the legacy of decades of nuclear weapons production and government-sponsored nuclear research. And EM's had its fair share of challenges over its history, but we've also realized tremendous success, as you pointed out. And if you really think about it, we've cleaned and closed major weapons sites across the country. We built the nation's first geologic repository. We built complex, one-of-a-kind facilities for treating different kinds of waste. And we safely demolished some of the largest and most complex buildings in the world. And in really doing that, we've addressed some of our most urgent risks in the overall cleanup, and we've gained incredible experience that we can apply to the future for the cleanup that we have yet to do. This version of EM's 10-year strategic vision really illustrates that the program is really poised for another set of accomplishments in the decades to come. And
we'll have more right after this from Fluor. The EM program began in 1989. At that time, there was environmental contamination at 107 DOE sites in the U.S. For perspective, all told, these sites were the equivalent in size of Delaware and Rhode Island combined. At that time, host communities, tribal nations, regulators, and others had little information about the extent and complexity of contamination at most DOE sites. The challenge was daunting and unprecedented in many ways. EM would embark on the most aggressive and ambitious environmental cleanup program in the nation's history. The scope of cleanup included 1,000 metric tons of weapons-grade uranium, more than 100 metric tons of plutonium, 90 million gallons of liquid radioactive waste, 700,000 metric tons of depleted uranium, 5,000 contaminated facilities, millions of cubic meters of contaminated soil, and billions of gallons of contaminated groundwater. The mission would call for teardown of some of the world's largest structures. Aging buildings laced with contamination from radioactive and chemical materials that pose serious threats to workers and required meticulous attention to safety unheard of in any previous cleanup effort. Despite the risks, as the strategic plan illustrates, the program has recorded major achievements with an impressive safety record. EM and its contractor partners have cleaned and closed major former weapon sites across the country, built the nation's first geological repository to safely manage and dispose of radioactive waste, built complex first-of-a-kind facilities to address one of the government's largest environmental risks, and successfully and safely demolished some of the largest buildings ever constructed. Progress over the past 30 years has been remarkable. EM's combined active remediation footprint has been reduced by 90%, from about 3,300 square miles to fewer than 300 square miles. The original 107 contaminated sites have been reduced to 15. We'll be back with more right after this from Fluor. Looking ahead, here are a few of the EM cleanup priorities for the coming year as outlined in the strategic vision. Hanford will continue to advance towards startup of the direct feed low activity waste program. At Savannah River site will process 4 million gallons of waste at the Defense Waste Processing Facility. Los Alamos will ship legacy transuranic waste to the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant. Moab, Utah will dispose of 1 million tons of uranium mill tailings. Idaho will continue operation of the Integrated Waste Treatment Unit, and Oak Ridge will continue progress toward disposal of uranium-233 and construction of a new mercury treatment facility. Other EM priorities include recruiting workers for current and future cleanup needs, continued implementation of in-task contracting through task orders, enhanced technology and innovation, improved means of waste disposal, continued emphasis on environmental justice and climate change. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but gives you an idea of the type of work that lies ahead. In reviewing the latest EM strategic vision, I had the opportunity to talk with two senior executives in the EM Communications Department at headquarters. My guests today are Erik Olds, EM Director of Communications, and Lee Tucker, a manager in EM's External Communications Group. Well, we're talking today with two officials at DOE headquarters about the strategic plan, and I'm very happy to have on the podcast today Erik Olds, who is Director of Communications for the EM program, and Lee Tucker, who's a member of the External Communications team, heads that team up, and we're very happy to have both Lee and Erik on the podcast. Welcome, guys.
Thank you very much.
Let's start by talking about the plan itself. You issue this plan, the strategic plan, every year, and I'd like to know why you do this. What is the purpose of the plan, and how does it help guide the EM program? Erik, could we start with you?
Sure, that sounds fantastic. I'd be happy to lead off, and Lee, please add anything that you'd like to. One of my favorite sayings is, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So I really see the vision as the what, the where, and the who of what EM wants to become in the future. The mission is why EM exists. It's really our purpose or passion, our cause. The strategic vision, which we're talking about, is really intended to help us gaze further out into the future to a place where we want to be in the future. And it really sets EM on a course that will span about a decade because we look at it about a decade at a time for the vision that really inspires all of us to achieve our mission in EM. Now, there's lots of benefits to having a compelling vision. You can read a lot about those, and I do believe organizations should have a vision. For EM in particular, I think the purpose of setting a vision is really primarily twofold. It's really there to create that long-term strategy for where the organization is going and where it wants to be in the future. And secondly, it really aligns everyone around that direction that we're heading in the future. And that alignment is very important to us achieving our cleanup goals.
Lee, anything to add there?
Yeah, absolutely. The EM mission, it's a large one, and there's a lot of talented people that go into making this organization work, and the collaboration between all the departments within EM, it's shown on a daily basis. But when we're talking about future planning, to see that level of communication and organization and the proverbial heads come together to talk about the future of the organization, it really is inspiring, and they do some amazing work.
Well, very good. The plan points out that the number of cleanup sites in the DOE complex has been reduced from the original 107 locations to the current 15 locations. And that indicates quite a bit of progress in the program over the years that EM has been in existence. Is it fair to say that the big number that we started out with, the 107, included a lot of low-hanging fruit, you might call it, that could be taken care of quickly, and now we're down to what you might consider the stubborn remnants that pose the toughest cleanup challenges, sort of like the sludge in the bottom of the waste tank. Were the first 100 as challenging as the last 15?
That's another great question. I'll go ahead and lead off again here. If you look at it holistically, for about 3 decades, really more than 30 years now, the EM program has really tackled one of the largest cleanup efforts in the world. In fact, it likely is the largest cleanup project in the world. And that project has really been to address the legacy of decades of nuclear weapons production and government-sponsored nuclear research. And EM's had its fair share of challenges over its history, but we've also realized tremendous success, as you pointed out. And if you really think about it, we've cleaned and closed major weapons sites across the country. We built the nation's first geologic repository. We built complex, one-of-a-kind facilities for treating different kinds of waste. And we safely demolished some of the largest and most complex buildings in the world. And in really doing that, we've addressed some of our most urgent risks in the overall cleanup, and we've gained incredible experience that we can apply to the future for the cleanup that we have yet to do. This version of EM's 10-year strategic vision really illustrates that the program is really poised for another set of accomplishments in the decades to come. And while some of our biggest challenges are ahead, I think that's really more of a factor of the size and complexity of those challenges at some of our sites than really a decision to wait and tackle other projects.
When you hear Erik say it like that, I think it's tough to say that any of the work that we've done to this point has ever been low-hanging fruit. I mean, this is challenging work, and it's been a great effort from the organization. I really think it's important to note also that we're always learning. Those first 100 laid the foundation for the work that we're doing today.
Well, each year, EM identifies important milestones that need to be completed during the coming year. And the plan discusses some of the accomplishments of the past year. I wonder if you could kind of summarize what some of those accomplishments were during 2022 and 2023.
Oh, absolutely. And here's where I probably won't do the program justice in the amount of time that we have, because we do every year publish an annual mission and priorities where we really pick out a set of key priorities that we want to focus on across the United States, across the EM complex. And that in no way represents all of the work that's going on within the environmental management program. An impressive body of work that we do annually at all of our sites. But we do pick out a couple of key projects, and then at the end of the year, we rate ourselves. We really do a report card where we look at the progress on those key priorities, and we give that to the public so everyone understands the progress and the successes that we've had on a year-to-year basis. I'd really encourage people to take a look at our scorecard and our year in review, because it really gives more of an in-depth look at the work that we're doing across the complex. But some of the things that, just to touch on a few of the accomplishments, at our waste isolation pilot plant in New Mexico, we received 235 transuranic waste shipments. At our Los Alamos field office in the same state, we completed 52 transuranic waste shipments to the waste isolation pilot plant. That is a huge priority, getting waste out of Los Alamos and to the waste isolation pilot plant. So by surpassing our goal, that was a huge accomplishment for the program. In Idaho, we started a nuclear facility for treating waste that they have at that site, and we completed the exhumation of a radioactive waste subsurface disposal area, a big piece of work for Idaho. Hanford, one of our biggest and most complex sites, we started the first large-scale treatment of waste from underground tanks. I mean, that's huge for that site. We've been working on tank waste treatment at Hanford literally for decades. Portsmouth in Ohio, we completed demolition of a 2.6 million square foot process building. And these are huge buildings that were used for uranium enrichment, primarily during the Cold War. They're massive facilities, full of equipment, and very complex. At our West Valley site in New York, we started demolition of a facility we call the main plant process building. And that's a key facility. Some vitrification and waste treatment work was actually done at that site in the 70s and 80s. And we're now getting to the point where we're taking down those facilities, which is very important to New York and the program as well. Our Oak Ridge site in Tennessee, we completed the cleanup, and we transferred an area called the biology complex from EM to a different program within DOE, an important piece of cleanup work that actually is making the way for other programs in the department to expand their missions and do important science and national defense work. At our Savannah River site in South Carolina, we're treating tank waste there. We have an active tank waste treatment system underway. We have a host of small sites. Just one of them that I would name, Moab. We've disposed of a cumulative 13 million tons out of an estimated 16 million tons of uranium mill tailings. That work is going very well there as well. And again, I would love to list everything we've done around the complex. We probably don't have time for it in the space of this show, but I'd really encourage everyone to go look for themselves and see the amount of work that we're doing.
Well, it's obviously it's a long list, and it's very impressive work that's being done under very hazardous and challenging conditions. And you've got a great workforce out there, well-trained folks who are dedicated to the mission, and so it's good to have you recite that list, even if it's partial, because I think people get a good feeling for the amount of work that actually is being accomplished on a very successful basis. Your plan identifies 4 sites where cleanup work will be completed over the next decade, and These are the Lawrence Livermore Laboratory, the Moab site, which you mentioned in Utah, the Nevada National Security Site, and Sandia National Laboratories in New Mexico. How significant is completion of cleanup at these sites to the overall program, and how will finishing these sites benefit the remaining cleanup program at the other sites from the standpoint of budgets or other things that would help clean up overall?
Lee, do you want to lead off on this one?
There's no better visual sign of EM's progress than completing work at a site. I'll go back to Erik mentioning the work at Moab. He and I had the pleasure of visiting there in December and helping celebrate that cumulative 13 million tons being disposed of from the site. Just a couple months ago, the last remaining building from that site was demolished. So, it's a building. What's a building? But again, as you said, it's important for the community to see. It's important for our stakeholders to see. And when they see that last building come down, it's a huge milestone for the organization and for that community.
Absolutely. That I think that was perfectly. And beyond the obvious benefits of really risk reduction and that cleanup experience as well, completing work at our sites really makes communities safer, as Lee pointed out, and it really supports national security and science missions too. A lot of the sites at which EM operates, there are other programs also operating. There's an active defense mission still underway in this country, and there are science missions. We have national labs, and a lot of the cleanup that we do makes land, makes facilities, infrastructure, other things available for these programs to use as they continue to ramp up in their missions. So we're really supporting a lot of other missions in the work that we do. And as Lee pointed out, I can't stress enough that the work we do and the fact that you can actually see the difference in these sites. It's not what's there. In many cases, it's what's not there. In that we're taking down buildings and removing equipment and cleaning up soil and groundwater, that builds trust and continued support for the remaining cleanup. And that's very important as we continue to work with stakeholders, tribal nations, Congress, and others.
Well, the plan says that in 2023, you're not only focused on reducing risks, but you've also been empowered to strengthen the communities near DOE sites that have done so much in making contributions to the national security of the country by supporting these sites. What are some of the things you're doing to make sure that you are strengthening communities? What does that mean?
This is one of my favorite questions, and I'm really glad you asked it. I like how Lee pointed out that the work we do it's not only important to the communities, it's important that they see that we're making progress in the work that we do. Many of the communities that are at the sites where we're doing our cleanup work, they've really shouldered the burden of either defense missions or research missions for many years before the environmental mission began, and now they're really hosting us, if you will, as we do our cleanup mission at those sites. I think our job is not just to clean up and reduce risk at these sites, but to really protect those communities because they did so much for national security and the other missions in this country. And how we do cleanup very much impacts the economic future of these communities. In many cases, and if you look at the map, many of our sites are not located in populated areas. I mean, the location of these sites was specifically chosen because they were remote and they had access to water or power, or they had other attributes that were attractive for their mission. So in many cases, the communities that grew up around these sites were very much focused, if you will, on those sites. The people in the community worked at the site. The businesses that grew up in the community supported the workers that worked at those sites. So What we do is we're cleaning up impacts the future of these communities. At some sites, we provide cleaned up or excess lands to local economic development entities, and those lands are actually used for more economic development. So they can bring other industry in that can create jobs that will essentially replace the jobs that are going to go away at some point once cleanup is done. And as I said, at other sites, our cleanup really paves the way for defense programs and science to expand their missions, which means, again, jobs and careers and economic stability for the communities around those sites.
And the communities are such valuable partners for us. In so many cases, their residents have worked at the sites for generations, so they have a vested interest in the work that we do and are truly valuable partners.
Well, one of your biggest priorities in EM is ensuring an adequate workforce, not only for the work at hand at present, but also preparing for the future and the work that lies in the years ahead. And you're devoting a lot of effort to developing the workforce for the future. Tell us, the plan talks about that. Tell us about some of the things you're doing to make sure you have enough trained workers to complete the cleanup mission.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say our workforce really is the common denominator for all of the success and progress that we're talking about in this program. I mean, I think we have the best workforce in the world in terms of their dedication, their experience, their ability to not only get the job done, but come up with some fairly creative solutions to problems that were literally created decades ago. So it's a fantastic workforce. We're hiring. So if you're watching this podcast, please visit our Office of Environmental Management website to learn about some of the opportunities. We're expanding programs for students and students who have recently graduated from college. As a matter of fact, within the last couple of weeks, we just brought in our latest group, if you will, of recent graduates and interns that are still in college. So we're really trying to get at that workforce that's still having their educational experience. We've really extended our recruiting efforts and targeting candidates through social media and web-based platforms. So we're really trying to go to places now that people are looking for opportunities. We held our first job fair this year at a major conference, and it was fantastically successful. We're increasing our work with students below the college level. We're doing a lot more in STEM, and we're making a significant investment through our minority serving institutions partnership program. That's a bit of a mouthful, but our minority serving program really works with a network of colleges around the United States and opens up opportunities for people in scientific and engineering fields to really get a taste of the work we do, not only here in headquarters, but at our sites around the country, and actually work on those cleanup activities to see if they'd be interested in a future career in those fields.
Can I share a quick story?
Mhm.
Erik talked about creative solutions as well as our minority serving institutions partnership program. I had the pleasure of participating in the judging of presentations that these MSIPP students gave at our waste management symposia back in March. I can't tell you how much I was blown away by the research, the creativity, and really the passion that these students had on display. Some of the solutions that they presented just blew away the judging panel, and it really is a clear example of that investment that you talked about at work. This is the future of our organization, and to be able to um, recruit that talent that creates these inspiring creative solutions, it's just so meaningful.
Some people who read the plan might be surprised at the fact that's contained in there that 95% of the EM budget is utilized through contracting with industry partners. The federal component of EM is relatively small compared to the contractor community that supports the cleanup program and actually carries out a lot of the work. You've modified your contracts to what's called an in-state contracting model. How has this benefited the cleanup program in terms of efficiency? And has there been any benefit to the taxpayer who's footing the bill for the cleanup?
Uh, That that's a good question, and within that 95% that you pointed out, 95% of our work is carried out through contracts essentially. And keep in mind that EM's workforce on the contractor side is about 30,000 people. That varies somewhat with the level of work that's going on, but about on a daily basis, we have about 30,000 men and women working across the United States on our various cleanup activities. So it does require a lot of focus on our contracts, which is, as you pointed out, the primary vehicle we use to get work done at these sites. So in the in-state contracting model, EM actually negotiates the scope, the cost and schedule on specific elements of work. And we do that through task orders in what we call an indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity contract, instead of using kind of a traditional cost-based contract that often, and those contracts often span 10 and even sometimes more years, and typically have more, I'll say, general scopes of work. And that model, the end state contracting model, really provides EM the ability to group work under the contract into very specific task orders. So it allows us to go after very specific activities at our sites, and that allows better clarity and really shorter time frames, as well as provides more accurate cost and schedule targets for the work that we want to do. As you can imagine, at some of our sites where we literally have decades of work to go, it is difficult in a contract vehicle to look at that span of time and really kind of accurately predict where we're going from a cost and schedule perspective. So being able to chunk, if you will, that work down into very specific bites where we have more clarity on what we want to accomplish and how much it's going to cost and how long it's going to take is a significant benefit to the department. And it also provides more of what I would call an accountability structure that's really designed to motivate contractors towards improved cost and schedule performance, because they're not being placed in a position as well where they're looking at such a long period of time and trying to accurately predict what might happen in the future.
Do you have anything to add there?
I can't top that.
Okay. It's hard for some people to believe, but the EM program is approaching 35 years old. Having been born in 1989, the few sites still have decades of work left to do. Thinking about Hanford there, which some people are estimating at maybe 50 to 60 years of work left. As you look ahead, what are some of the challenges and obstacles that exist to timely completion of the cleanup program? And do you feel like EM is on track to finish the job in a timely way?
So I'll go ahead and lead off again. So I spent most of my time in the field at sites in Washington State. That would be Hanford, and then in Nevada. At the time, it was called the Nevada Test Site. And I most recently came to headquarters. I've been here about a year and a half now, and it working at headquarters has really given me the benefit of seeing the length and breadth of the EM program, and it's really impressive. And one thing I've learned at headquarters is that EM is really a can-do program with a really dedicated and experienced workforce. strong congressional support, and really pretty good alignment with communities and stakeholders and tribal nations, which I said is so important to getting the work and the progress that we've talked about during this program. You know, as I pointed out earlier, we've cleaned and closed major weapons sites across the country, and that work continues today. And based on EM's experience and progress to date, I'm confident EM can finish this job. If you look at it from a challenge perspective, I think there'll always be challenges when you're dealing with one of the largest environmental legacies in the world. I think coming from a site like Hanford, I would say one of the biggest challenges still is the unknowns. And you might say after 30 years, we understand everything there is to understand about these sites. But I think people really need to keep in mind that, the environmental legacy that we're dealing with now was really the result of our defense and nuclear research missions in this country, much earlier in its history. And at the time, the environment was really not the focus of those programs. And so as we continue to clean up at sites like Hanford, there will always be unknowns that you encounter. And those can be a challenge in terms of additional work that may need to be done, or doing that work in a different way because the challenge that you encounter requires a very specific solution. So encountering that legacy waste or challenges, or the way that we have to do work, or just with aging facilities, some of which are now 60 years old or more, can add both time and cost to a program like EM. Lee, did you want to add to that?
You know, really, the only thing I can add to it is, I'm relatively new to the cleanup mission. I've been with EM for just a couple years now, coming from 20 years in the Department of Defense. And what's really struck me about this mission is you said it, it's that can-do program. It's the can-do attitude that is prevalent throughout the agency. And the ability to come up with new innovative solutions to tackle those challenging problems that you mentioned. It's really inspiring to me. And we work together with our communities, our congressional delegates, our partner agencies, in a way that I've not experienced anywhere else in my federal career. So, yeah.
Well, given that 35-year history, let's talk about how the EM program, the cleanup program, has evolved and improved over the years, becoming more streamlined, more efficient, incorporating innovation and new technology, improving safety. I've heard, for example, at Hanford in the tank waste program a few years ago, people had referred to it as a clipboard operation that now really exhibits all the characteristics of a 21st century operation, with a lot of innovation and technology having been incorporated. Can you talk about that a little bit, about how the program has changed and improved over the years?
Absolutely, and I think I want to take a little bit of a different approach to the answer on this, and really even tie it back to the discussion that we just had on workforce and bringing people into the program. EM's historical accomplishments have always been aided by technology and research and development, and even to today, R&D continues to play a pretty central role in our cleanup priorities. And we really do leverage the expertise of the national labs, other DOE programs, industry, academia, but really a lot of what we do we owe to the men and women that do these jobs every day. As I said, they provide some of the most creative and innovative solutions to some of the problems that we're facing at these sites. So really listening to our employees and ensuring that we understand the challenge and how we need to tackle the challenge and coming up with those solutions is extremely important. The other piece is also bringing people in, bringing those fresh perspectives, bringing those new ideas in. I think when you come into an organization and you're new, that is really the best time to take a look at the work that is being done and really provide that out of the box perspective, if you will. And if we can keep our workforce refreshed and I think across the board, not only with the more academic fields, our scientists and our engineers and the other folks, but also with our tradespeople and the people that are doing the work every day at our sites. If we can keep our workforce refreshed with those perspectives and bringing people in that can bring in those new ideas and new methods and new ways of doing things, and also look at some of our historical problems and maybe give us some different insight on how we tackle those problems, I think we will continue to keep ourselves refreshed as a program. Lee, did you want to add that, given your newness?
No, no, I mean, nothing I could say could top that. It's I go back to that panel, the judging the presentations of the MSIPP panel, and I think back to those students and just how brilliant they were, and looking at some of our EM colleagues that have been in the complex for 10, 20, 30 years, and they're looking at some of the solutions that these students are coming up with and just looking at each other in awe. And just and you can see it on their face that they're literally looking at the future of the program. It really is awe-inspiring. The technology is great, but we have to remember that technology is developed by people, and we've got some amazing people.
Well, we've covered a lot of territory in this interview in the last few minutes. I'd like to do two things in closing. One, Erik, can you tell us where our viewers and listeners can access the strategic plan if they want to look at it, review it? Where can they see it? And secondly, is there anything else that you or Lee would like to add that we haven't asked you about today?
Uh, I'll go ahead and start off, and thank you. For information, if you go to the Department of Energy's website at energy.gov, it's very straightforward. We're a major program, obviously, within the Department of Energy, and we're the program that does cleanup. There's a lot of other interesting missions in the Department of Energy, but again, I would encourage everyone to see what we're doing in EM. And look for the EM program, and you'll find not only some of the documents that we talked about today, but a lot of information on a lot of really interesting work that is going on across the country. And again, I'll say, having spent most of my time at Hanford in Washington State and the Nevada test site, I thought those two sites were perhaps the most rich in terms of history and complexity and things that I did not know about the history of this country. And in this position, I've really had the benefit, as I said, to not only see what's going on across the complex. Lee pointed out that we made a trip to Moab. I've had the opportunity to visit most of our other sites. And there is an amazing history with every one of those sites and how they contributed to this country's defense or research missions. And the work that's going on at those sites today is equally fascinating. So I would really encourage everyone to go look at that information. And as I said, the historical value alone is amazing. Um, Overall, I would say I would like to leave folks with this idea. The EM program's combined active remediation footprint has really been reduced by about 90% in the work that we've done so far, that 3 decades or 30 years that we've talked about. I mean, that's a reduction from about 3,300 square miles to really then fewer than 300 square miles of active cleanup work if you added it all up. So that's an incredible amount of progress that we've made across the complex, really in our first 30 years. Yes, there's a lot of challenges and work ahead, but I think with the can-do attitude and the workforce and the support from Congress that we've talked about and all the other attributes, we're on a good path to complete that work. So I think the state of the program is strong and moving forward safely and always with the taxpayer in mind.
Lee, any parting thoughts?
I just encourage everyone to learn more about the program. Again, visit energy.gov/EM, really easy to find. And, check out our social media accounts too. You're going to learn about what we're doing there on a daily basis. At the bottom of the page, you'll find our Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube links. And yeah, come learn more about EM. And as Erik said in the beginning, we're hiring.
Well, Erik Olds and Lee Tucker, thank you very much for joining us on the podcast today. We appreciate having you here. It's been very interesting and informative. And thank you again for being with us.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us, Mike.
Today's episode of the Gone Fission Nuclear Report is brought to you by Fluor. We're building a better world.